We're going to move forward to our next exciting speaker. Really excited to have Claire Burge here with us. She is the CEO of an organization called This Is Productivity. We have something in common. We can both speak a little native South Afrikaner language. I was very proud to use that again. I haven't done it since I was 5 years old. Had a great opportunity to spend a few moments with her yesterday in the break, and I think you're going to be really excited about some of the insights that she has to share. She's also the best-selling author of a book called Spin, Taking Your Creativity to the Nth Degree, and I think it's a great add-on to what we've already started this morning with Ben. So will you please welcome Claire Burge to the stage.
No, I turned wrong, left your heart torn. Is that what devils do? Took you so long.
Hi, everybody. It's really, really good to be here with you today. And something that I just absolutely love about conferences is how topics tend to meld into each other and actually just work so well together. Ben, you nailed it. You really nailed it. And if Ben's topic was how to attract and retain talent, my whole presentation today is going to be about what to do with them when they're inside your organization. And that's why I say the two just really work so well together. So, before we kick into the actual characteristics of what makes up future-forward thinking organizations, I want you to take a step back and I want you to think specifically about the concept of happy work. This is the purpose that drives every single day of my life, and this is also very much the purpose behind our company. We find that companies are able to retain and attract amazing talent, as Ben has pointed out, because there are really smart people out there who are saying, look, we need to do things differently with employees. But in terms of actually taking those people and then taking it to the next level and keeping them and making that mission happen that Ben spoke about, that 2 to 5 year mission, how do you actually make that happen? And the key thing is coming back to this. Ultimately, at the end of every single day, people want to know, am I happy? That's the big question that we're all asking. And in terms of happy work, it becomes a really, really powerful litmus test for you and your organization and your employees inside to kind of track where you're at. Yes, we're reaching the goals. Yes, we're chasing those goals. But is the process, is the journey that we're going on happy work? And when you can honestly ask yourself that question and say yes to it, then you know, yes, we're accomplishing that mission, the 2 to 5 year mission. We're doing what we need to do. But if your employees are honestly coming back to you and saying to you, no, this doesn't feel like happy work, that's the time for you to go back to the drawing board and kind of go, right, what are we going to do to get things back on track? And so in putting together today's presentation, what I basically did was I went and I did a very, very rough analysis. So there's no big science behind it. But what I did was I went and I took all of the organizations that we work with. Now, we work with huge, huge global companies right down to the small startup with 5 to 10 people in it. And I said, out of those companies, what are the characteristics that really define them in terms of them being true to the concept of happy work? What are the things that keep reoccurring? And what I did was I mapped all of those and I basically said, okay, what are the overlapping ones? There's definitely some outlier characteristics, but what are the overlapping, reoccurring characteristics that keep coming up? And those are the 13 characteristics that I'm going to be sharing with you today. And I want to say to you that as I go through these 13 characteristics, keep in mind that I also, when I was categorizing them, I very much decided that I was going to look at it from a leadership perspective, I was going to look at it from an employee perspective, and then also very much in terms of if you look at it from a leadership and an employee perspective, the relationship between those two, because they don't function on their own. Okay. So before we jump into the characteristics, I have to give you a little bit of background to me. I am a downhill mountain biker. I absolutely love racing down crazy, crazy high hills. I'm one of those crazy people that go and put on full body armor and literally jump off of some really, really, really big obstacles. And the reason why I've come to love mountain biking so much is because mountain biking teaches me about happy work. Now, that might sound a bit weird to you, and you might be wondering, how does she make the connection there? But the reason is, I often find myself in a lot of mud. Generally, when I'm finished my expeditions up mountains and on my bike, I'm pretty much covered, and the bike doesn't look like that anymore. It's pretty much just covered in mud. And if you think about the transformation that companies are currently going through, if you think about the shift from where we are right now in terms of companies and where we need to move to, it's a very muddy, murky process. And the navigation of that change is a very, very, very big challenge. And you kind of often left feeling very dirty in the process. And you kind of don't know how to navigate your way out of it. And what I've found is that when I get onto my mountain bike and I go and I chase down those hills, a lot of different lessons keep coming up to me that help me to navigate that change. And I've started using this framework to help my employees, first of all, but also our clients to navigate this process of change. So first of all, a few key things that we need to think about is when you're thinking about chasing down a very, very, very steep hill on a mountain bike, okay, you need to have the right equipment, or else you're going to end up breaking some really, really, really bad bones. Not a good place to be in. And one of the key things that I've realized when I'm on that bike and chasing down those hills is that it's been a progression, a journey that I've been on my bike. When I started mountain biking a number of years ago, I started on a very entry-level bicycle. It didn't have all the bells and whistles on it. It didn't have the best gear and all of that type of thing, and I definitely was not kitted out in full body armor. I literally had a pair of trainers and some riding clothes on. But as the years have gone on and I've become better and better and better, I've literally been able to trade my bike up. And so coming back to the process of change and the feeling of getting out of this muddy, murky place when it comes to change and moving our organizations into a new way of being, we need to realize that it is a process and we need to be slow with ourselves. You don't get onto the bike and start with the full body armor. It's a process to get there. Second of all, I've also had to realize and learn that in order to really, really be good at my mountain biking and to actually be able to land the jump without falling off of the bike, I've had to train in alternative ways. So very importantly, I have to do running as well. I have to do a number of different strength exercises. And in exactly the same way, organizations and employees, and most specifically leadership within organizations, need to train in alternative ways. There is no one way to navigate this type of change. And most importantly, and this is where organizations really tend to shy away from things, is you have to realize that in order to navigate that murkiness, to actually make this change that Ben has so well put out for us, you're gonna fall. That's a reality. And unless we actually embrace the falling process and actually lean into the fall and push our limits to the point of falling, we're not actually ever gonna be able to navigate through this change. And so those are three very, very challenging realities that we as companies and employees within companies need to face. So jumping into these 13 characteristics or 13 elements that make up future forward-thinking organizations in this process of change that we're seeing in the world of work. The very first characteristic is companies that are thinking about the future, that are meeting employee needs, have various very, very flexible communication methods and platforms. So something that we're seeing in our clients is that there is no longer just one method of communication inside companies. We're coming into companies and we're working with them. Groups are using tools like Central Desktop. Teams are using WhatsApp. Teams are using LinkedIn. Teams are using email. And what you're finding is that it is actually generating an extreme amount of stress inside people because communication has become so fragmented. But the reality of it is it's not going away. That fragmentation is here to stay. And what we as managers and leaders of companies, and most importantly, people who are having to bring teams together, okay, need to understand that this fragmentation is an issue that is going to have to be addressed, okay? And it cannot be addressed by removing platforms because the platforms are just going to increase and increase and increase. So we need to find other really creative ways around that. And most importantly, and I'm going to be coming back to this as we go through this presentation, there's a very good way to manage that fragmentation that happens in organizations, and I'll speak to that specifically in a point coming up. The second thing is mobile first. So quite a few of the presentations yesterday, this point came through very, very, very strongly. Organizations who are thinking about the future and positioning their teams are putting this as an absolute priority, okay? So the key question is, can I work from anywhere at any point in time, and can I do it in a way that I want to do it? If you can say yes to that, if you're allowing your employees to do that, You are a mobile-first company, and you are ready to embrace this new way of working. The second characteristic is these teams have central collaboration points. So the mere fact that we are here, and this is a central desktop PGI conference, means that you as companies are already on this track. But what we're finding is that companies who have got these central collaboration points where people are not having to work inside communication channels, but are able to work inside collaborative workspaces, are companies that are seeing real benefits in terms of actually being able to retain employees. So something very interesting that we have, when we've been working with HR departments within companies, they're saying to us that employees are starting to ask very different questions during interviews. Okay? Potential employees are starting to ask questions like, how will I be working? What will my working day actually look like? Okay? If you think about it, those are not common questions that people would have asked before. It was more like, well, what does my job involve? What will I actually be outputting? What is my pay? What are my benefits? People are starting to take very seriously that the impact of the tools on their workday is huge. Okay? And if you think about it, it makes sense that people are starting to think this way, because a number of years ago in 2012, I undertook a very radical experiment where I completely gave up email for a year. I didn't think it would be possible to do it, but what happened was when I made that decision to actually give up email, I got a very interesting reaction from people around me. There was no middle of the ground reaction. It was literally an absolute extreme anger on one end, and on the other end, people were like, oh my goodness, that's amazing. I want to see what happens with this. And the psychologist in me was very curious as to that reaction, because generally when people make decisions, they don't react. You know what I mean? People don't react to those decisions. But there was this extreme reaction, and I was like, I've hit a nerve, and I want to test this. I want to play with this. And so that's why I actually set out and started tracking this experiment. And one of the key things that I learned during that experiment, that year-long experiment, was the rules of systems, the underlying rules that have been coded into those systems determine our behavior. So if you think about it, up until just very recently, in most companies, email has formed the absolute backbone of a company. Okay? It is the way people work. And the unwritten rule of email is empty me out. Okay? And so people spend their entire day emptying a box out, because that's the unwritten rule. And just like a traffic system inside a city that dictates your behavior, whether you want to or not, the systems inside work dictate our behavior. And people are starting to realize that those systems are adversely affecting them. An inbox is not a healthy environment. It doesn't leave people happy, going back to the happy work litmus test. And so people are starting to go, well, what is the environment that I'm going to be working in? And are you looking after me by providing me with the correct working tools? And so very definitely tools like Central Desktop and other tools like that that enable people to work better and in a more intuitive way are becoming defining characteristics of organizations that are stepping into this new way of working. Okay. Number 4, this one is a very controversial characteristic because it almost seems as if we're taking a step back into an old way of doing things in order to move forward. What we are finding with companies that are really progressive in their way of thinking is that they are taking, so going back to number 3, if you have that central collaboration point, you need to understand that by allowing an entire workforce into a central collaboration point, you're taking people out of a very closed environment, which used to be email, and you are now opening that entire environment up, and you are making them work in a different way. And so there are a lot of downsides to that. Number 1, there's information overload, and people have to find a way around managing all of that information. But the upsides of that is that because it's open, people aren't constantly trying to find stuff that they don't have access to, okay? And so what we're seeing here is that people are having to really take a step back and go, okay, what makes up a workday? So if you think about what makes up a workday, there's 5 key things that make up a workday. The first one is your calendar, so how you actually manage a calendar. The second thing is, importantly, how you take what's in the calendar and actually output. So that might be meetings, it might be tasks. So those are the number 2 and 3. Number 4 is then, importantly, once you've done your task, what is the actual output? So that's generally an actual piece of work that in some way has to be documented. So it's all the information that's managed in the company. And then the fifth element is kind of like the overarching thing that makes up that, and that's communication. So any one of your communication tools. So those 5 key elements of work, people are realizing, because of the fragmentation, because of this opening up of that environment, actual rules are having to be set for those 5 elements. Okay? And so that's very, very important. What we're doing with our clients is we're starting to say to them, hang on a minute, you have to take a step back and you have to ask yourself the question, how do we communicate? Okay? Can you honestly say that when you came into your company that somebody sat down with you and said to you, this is how we communicate in this company, this is how we manage documents, this is how we do this, this is how we work? It's an unwritten assumption that you know how to work. And yes, you do, because you're an intelligent human being. But the fact of the matter is, that's 5 different ways of working in a small company that grows to 50 different types of ways of working, that grows to 1,000, 20,000, okay? And eventually, you have 20,000 different styles of communicating. You've got 100 different styles of managing documents. And that's where things become really, really stressful for people. And so by establishing the rules of work for people to say, this is how we as a company talk, this is how we as a company work, this is how we document, this is how we meet, you're providing people a framework within which to function. And very interestingly, what we found with the companies that we've done work with is when these rules are in place, it actually helps to stabilize and, most importantly, foster culture. Okay? So coming back to the question that you asked is, you know, culture seems to be a very, very big thing about forward-thinking organizations. And yes, it is. You attract the talent, as Ben was speaking about. But then once inside there, that talent can go very, very, very wrong. This is how you underpin the culture. This is the glue that makes culture happen. Okay. And then point number 4 leads directly into point number 5, in that once you've actually established those rules, put them out there. Make them available for people and make them living, breathing, living documents that actually become something that people can change and edit as they go along. And so what we're starting to find with companies, is that they actually are establishing what we've termed playbooks. Okay? So for example, in our company, every single time somebody comes into the company on their very, very first day, they get given a personalized playbook. And in that playbook, all the rules of how we work in those 5 key areas are actually defined and set out for them. This is how we communicate. This is how we meet. This is how we document things. This is how we manage information. This is how we task. And all of a sudden, you have a culture that's glued together and embedded and enabled to grow. Moving on to number 6. Another characteristic, if you think about the different points that both Ben and I have touched on this morning, and many of the points that have come through from yesterday's conversations and sessions, is that onboarding is becoming absolutely critical, okay? You cannot bring an employee into an organization, and taking this one step further, you cannot bring your client into your organization if you're not going to onboard them. You can, but the results are going to be yet another type of way of working, another method of communicating, another method of managing documents that's going to set everything off on a different track. And so onboarding and the HR function within companies is becoming absolutely critical. The companies that are really redefining the future are taking onboarding so seriously that they actually see it as something that it lasts for no less than 6 months. Okay? You have to onboard, you have to embed culture in order to actually make a company move forward and get to the point where you can execute on the mission. Okay. Number 7, and again, coming back to some of the questions that were asked here, people have this notion that moving into the future, the idea of very, very strong leadership at the top that doesn't filter down anymore is falling away. And in our experience, I would actually like to counter that and say, no, it's not falling away. If anything, it is actually becoming more and more essential moving forward, okay? You have to have vision, and you have to have somebody who's actually filtering that culture and that vision down into the organization. Where the change is coming in is in what the actual purpose of the CEO of a company is, okay? I think we've forgotten the art of thinking. The key purpose of a CEO is to think. And CEOs are no longer doing this, okay? Whether you're the CEO of a 5-person company or whether you're the CEO of a 20-person company, that role of thinking is absolutely critical, okay? And that thinking time in terms of how are we going to capitalize on the market? How are we actually going to serve our client better? The thinking that the leader at the top of the organization has to do needs to filter down. And it needs to filter down into the playbooks, into how do we work, okay? And if you can do that, then you've actually turned that form of directive leadership away from a command and control style to actually saying, this is how we take our culture, this is how we take the magic that we have within our organization and actually make it scale. Moving on to characteristic number 8, there's a very, very big sense of freedom and trust. And again, this point is directly related back to point number 3, point number 4, and point number 5 that I made. In that, interestingly enough, a lot of people think that freedom and trust are things that naturally occur when you open an environment up. They don't. Freedom and trust actually require a lot of boundaries, okay? And again, that's kind of counterintuitive. A lot of people say, but how can you have freedom and trust with a lot of boundaries in place? The reason for that is people need boundaries, because it's only when boundaries are put into place, when rules are put into place, that people have something to push back against. If you've got nothing to rebel against, where will the innovation come from? The innovation comes from the framework that the directive leader has to put into place. And when people have that and they can push back against it and go, that's not working for me, or that's not working for my client, that's where the innovation starts coming in. That's where you start seeing that entrepreneurial person who you employed in the first place actually come to life, okay? So the 9th characteristic of future forward-thinking organizations is openness. And this, again, relates back to the central collaboration point and coming back to the email experiment that I undertook. The key thing that is defining these organizations that are moving into the future is moving away from closed environments. Coming back to the inbox, email drives us. It drives organizations, okay? But it's a completely closed environment. And the basic fundamental of human nature is the reality that we want to know what we don't know. So by embedding and putting as the backbone of your organization an email-driven culture means that what you're effectively doing is you're putting into motion every single day the thoughts that people are having to look for stuff that they don't know, okay? I can't see into your inbox. I can't see into your inbox, and you can't see into mine. And so in the back of my mind, I'm constantly asking the question, but what don't I know? What's being discussed that I don't have access to, okay? And so what happens is when you move people out of those closed environments into open environments, you literally calm the entire ecosystem down, okay? Because people all of a sudden have access to everything that they should have access to. So they don't want to know anymore. And they know that if they do want to know and they need to know, they can go and find it because it's all there. And it's really interesting when you do that, when you calm the ecosystem down, all of a sudden people become very focused on work. And they're like, right, where's the work? Instead of that underlying human tendency to chase what we don't know, okay? Which is where that very, very negative email culture manifests itself in the likes of BCCing everybody, CCing people just to cover your back. All of that goes away when you move people into these open environments. Number 10. I would like to say that something that I predict within the next 2 years is that key role of an admin assistant or an old-fashioned secretary, if you could call it that, is going to come back in huge, huge demand, okay? We've kind of gone through a phase where we said, look, this is just kind of like a luxury. Senior level executives had them, not really useful. And then we kind of went into this whole crazy stage where virtual assistants became really big, and it is a very big, booming industry. I would like to say that I'm very slowly but surely in the companies that we're working with starting to see that an administration role is coming back with full force, okay? But the interesting thing is that it's no longer pure administration. These people have got very, very, very serious IT and technology skills, okay? They are people who have very, very, very deep insight into strategic thinking. They get where companies need to go in the future, okay? So it is very much that entrepreneurial employee that Ben was talking about. And so the key thing here is that they will need to fulfill this role, okay? If you think about it, if you think of all the characteristics that I've just discussed with you, moving an organization out of a very closed environment into an open environment And setting rules in place by which you as a company play means that you are going to move towards a place of collaboration. And if you move towards a place of collaboration, that means that you're going to be working better than you were before, which means that you should be growing faster, which means that you should be outperforming goals, okay? And so if you think about it, that environment is constantly going to have to change. And if you speak to a lot of people who have had to take companies through very, very big phases of growth, the general rule out there in terms of company growth is the 30-100 rule, okay? So when a company hits 30 employees, and then when it hits 100 again, then when it hits 300 and 1,000, et cetera, et cetera. Those are kind of like the massive, massive shaping periods when everything has to change. The tools have to change. The methods, the processes, the systems, absolutely everything has to change at those integral points, okay? And that is where the role of the administrator is going to come back in full force, because somebody has to take control of this. And that role doesn't quite exist yet in companies. Okay. And I've already touched on this, that key characteristic of future forward-thinking organizations, the outperformance of goals. If you think about it, when you recruit somebody, when you employ somebody, okay, you are essentially employing that person on their ability to execute on a job, okay? But the key thing is that if you have established the organization and the culture and you've put the framework in place for collaboration to happen, the sum of the parts is always greater than the whole, okay, than the individual. And so naturally, the key thing is that the litmus test of whether your organization is truly collaborative is whether you're actually outperforming goals. If you're simply reaching your goals, collaboration isn't a reality in your organization, okay? That's the really, really tough question you have to be asking yourself. Because at the employment stage, when you're recruiting people, you can't recruit for the greater whole because you don't know how that individual is going to perform within the whole. But if collaboration is there and real, you will outperform your goals. Number 12. This is a very interesting one and very much aligned to the client and thinking about the client, okay? Most companies start out based on a client problem, okay? But what we're seeing is when collaboration happens, because you're moving companies and teams towards an open way of thinking, people have access to information that they didn't have access to before, which means that people can connect dots which they weren't connecting before. And so we are seeing a very, very, very strong shift in the market away from pure problem solving towards need anticipation, okay? And so clients are actually having to start forming what I would call a second revenue stream in their companies related specifically to client needs. And most often, clients actually don't know what they need. But because you are working with them in the way that you are working with them, you can actually anticipate those needs as an external outsider to their company. And so we're starting to see this very, very clear shift in revenue thinking and in client thinking, away from mere problem solving to need anticipation. Okay. And then coming to the end, this is a very interesting one, and I've only very recently started seeing this emerging in clients, is where our clients are going, where can we actually add value? So for example, the conversation that I was having with Central Desktop yesterday was, where can you, as a software company, start adding value? And one of those key areas is in implementation, okay? It's very difficult for a client to navigate the whole implementation stage of bringing a new software into a company. And you need to be asking yourself that exact same question as well, is where can we become value add? Because that is exactly coming back to the previous point that I made around problem solving versus need anticipation, okay? If you are helping your client to be more collaborative, if you are working in a more collaborative way, you are going to be able to add value in different ways in the organization and to your client that you weren't thinking of before. And there's also a revenue line related to that. Okay. So just very quickly, as I wrap up my talk here, my mic has gone there, it's back again. There are 13 key points. Like I said to you, this is what I'm seeing in real life playing out with clients that we are working with. And very importantly, I want to end my presentation with the concept of the fall that I spoke about. You need to understand. Am I doing something? Are we back? Good. Okay. You need to understand that falling is hard. This is not an easy process. And I want to refer to two business growth models. The first one is a model that's been produced by research that's been done by Gallup. And the other one is a Drexler-Siebert research study that was done. And very interestingly, if you look at these two growth curves, okay, the one is shaped like an S and the one is shaped like a V. And very interestingly, I want you to focus on the V shape, okay? The S shape basically shows how a company grows. Notice that it's more plateau growth, okay, than what it is exponential growth. And very importantly, look at the V shape. In terms of a company moving towards collaboration, a company moving more towards growth, it's a V shape. There's a very, very clear descent, okay? A company has to fall in order to learn how to actually collaborate. And you need to prepare yourself for that. And so to wrap up, I want to end and come back to the concept of my mountain bike, okay? I've had to trade up. I've had to learn how to cross-train in different areas in order to actually be able to conquer those mountains and to conquer those really, really serious jumps. And most importantly, I didn't start with full body armor, but now when I head out on the hills, I do have full body armor on, and I'm able to do the jump. But it's been a process. It's been a process of actually descending. And exactly the same thing applies to companies who are moving towards a new way of working, who are moving towards collaboration. It's hard. It's going to require falling. But fall, because the jump is on the other side. And it's amazing when you actually land it. Thank you for having me here today. Is there time for questions? Good. Okay. Questions? Are there any questions? Question over here? Yeah.
Hi. Is there any way that you can do the things we're talking about, but without having the top leadership? If the people in the company are all collaborative and peer-to-peer and support each other, but you maybe have a top-level leadership that might be here one day and here the other day, could it ever succeed?
My gut reaction to that is no. So for those, did everybody hear that question? Okay, the question was, is it ever possible for a company to fully move towards a point of collaboration if that directive leadership is not bought into it? My gut reaction is no. You're only ever going to experience, I would say, like 60% of what collaboration can actually be. Because if you think about it, every single part within a moving team is so absolutely critical, okay? And a team who are actually trying to execute from day to day are so wrapped up in day-to-day operations that somebody has to fulfill that strategic visionary role of moving the company forward, that role of thinking that I was referring to. And so if somebody's not doing that, it's a big missing gaping hole, okay? And there's no way that when you are so consumed with everyday operations that you're able to think that way as well. It's two different types of thinking. It's two different skill sets. And so what's going to happen in companies, either you're going to see somebody from the team emerge, okay, and there's going to be a huge disruption within the leadership, but ultimately a leader always needs to emerge. And if that's suppressed and stifled, you'll never get the full way to collaboration. Any more questions? Yes.
If I were to stop emailing for a year, it would be called a vacation. So what did you do?
Okay, the very first thing that I did was I moved our entire company at the time. So I headed up a technology company, and I was literally at point of selling it out to a Google education company in South Africa. And so what I did was I moved the entire group of people who were involved, so my team as well as the acquiring team, I moved all of us into a collaboration software tool like Central Desktop. I chose Teamwork at the time, okay? And I basically mandated across the organization that absolutely no internal communication would happen in email anymore. It all happened inside the tool. And I basically applied one of the characteristics that I spoke about here, where I defined the rules. I was like, this is how we will task. This is how we will message. This is how we will do that. So that was one of the key things. And then how I handled the external communication coming to me was I had 2 autoresponders on my inbox. And I basically just said to people, I'd love to talk to you. Please don't email me. Pick up the phone. And the really interesting thing was I never lost a piece of business. I never, ever missed an important conversation because the important stuff came to me. Yeah. Yes.
Considering the answer to the first question that you had, do you think that there are only certain types of companies that this would work for? Because there are some that are so monolithic or Neolithic that they can't, we have teams of millennials who, when you consider embedding culture or this is how we work, they want to communicate via IM or text or Google Hangouts. Meanwhile, their sextagenarian leaders have their admins print out emails for them to read.
Yeah. What I would like to say is that what we're seeing is we're actually seeing a very big move from millennials to, there's a need and an absolute desire from millennials to buy in that higher level of management. So one of the big misconceptions of millennials is that they're quite selfish in their ways of doing, and they're actually not. They're highly, highly collaborative. And so a millennial is definitely not wanting to not bring the rest of the organization with. A millennial is actually dying to sit down with the octogenarian and say, this is a new way of working, can we do this? And so what we're finding in companies is that that divide is actually not as big. It's more of an illusion. It's not as big as people think it is. But what people who are trying to bring about this change, if I could call it your collaboration champions, what they need to really, really start focusing on is how to facilitate that discussion, okay? And what we're finding is that in-person discussions are a really powerful way to do it. So actually setting up meetings and that type of thing between those leaders and those people to actually just have a conversation. So in essence, organizations definitely need to start moving more towards face-to-face communication again, because people are have been hiding behind emails for too long, and that's where things are breaking down. More questions? Here we go.
So you talked about the 5 things
That make up a workday.
that make up a workday. And so is that somewhere, I'm assuming we're going to have these available on Central Desktop, because I did not get them all, but I really liked that.
No problem. So I'll go through them very quickly again. Okay, so the very first thing is time. Okay, if you think about it, how people plan their time, it's their calendar. Okay. The second thing is tasks, how you actually task, how you do work. The third thing is documents, so any information in the company. The fourth thing is meetings. And the fifth thing is communication, so any of your communication platforms. What I'll do is I'll actually add that in as a slide to this deck, and you will be given access to these. Okay, brilliant. Any other questions? Yes.
I was interested in your concept of customer onboarding and what your thoughts are about customer onboarding, how to make that happen.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to share very much from our own experience, having gone through the no email experiment. So because we are a no email organization, we don't communicate via email, customer onboarding is massive to us. You know what I mean? Because every client that actually engages with us has to know that they're not going to be emailing us. So what we do is we actually have, before we engage in any form of work with them, before we actually even sign a contract with clients, we have what we call our rules of play session. And what we do is we describe to them how we work. We explain to them that we work in a collaboration platform. We explain to them what our different methods of communication are and how we will engage with them. So what communication methods do you use in an emergency? What is the general everyday conversation? You know what I mean? All of those type of things. And we have actually found that clients are extremely, extremely, extremely appreciative of that by actually taking them through that session. Because again, coming back to the concept of putting a boundary in place, it sets expectations. People know how to function within the environment, okay? Whereas if you think about it, you as a company have kind of figured out how to work out, you know, with each other and how everybody plays. But when you bring a client into that equation, you're basically bringing an entire company on board who you have absolutely no clue how they meet, how they document, how they task. And that is where a lot of the friction in any given work day actually arises from. So if you can establish those rules from the outset, you reduce so much friction in the process. And we haven't yet had one client that has pushed back on us. They've loved it. They've embraced it fully and said, right, we want to do this. So, okay. And I'll even go so far as to say that I think about 90%, I haven't actually tallied it, 90% of our clients have actually adopted very similar ways of working because of that, because it works so well. Okay. Is there a question? No, sorry. I thought I saw a hand. Any more questions? Okay. Is there one more?
Son?
Yes.
Okay. I was really interested in the idea of the resurgence of the assistant,
Yes.
the administrative assistant. So I know that you imagine them as being more talented, more in tune with what the company goals are and the direction. I wonder, traditionally, administrative assistants are entry level. They're people coming out of college. Do you think that people coming out of that are more ready and more primed for those goals, or do you think that it's not an entry level job? You're looking for specific talents, like someone who's more senior.
I would definitely say that the new admin assistant that is coming into companies is actually going to be a very, very senior role. It's going to have to be somebody with very rich networks. It's going to have to be somebody with very, very broad understanding, like almost like general management experience in terms of like their ability to understand the interconnectedness between functions within a company. And most importantly, like I said, the ability to actually take strategy that's being discussed and actually go, hang on a minute, this is all the administrative stuff that makes that enables that strategy. So definitely not an entry-level job. But however, having said that, what we also need to understand about the millennial generation is that they're starting to work a lot younger, okay? So for example, even myself, I'm technically not a millennial, but I took my first job at the age of 12 in an accounting practice, okay? So if you think about me working 2 afternoons every week after school from the age of 12 to the age of 18, I actually had a lot of work experience in those 6 years. You know what I mean? So if you're dealing with somebody that's 21 but has very significant entrepreneurial or business experience, you know what I mean? Like I was at a breakfast in London last week speaking, and we were talking about the future of work specifically, and the person that was on the panel with me said she has literally in the last 2 weeks had to have a conversation with people that are coming to her for jobs, and they're coming back to her and saying to her, can I please just go and have a conversation with my mom about that? Because they're 16, but they have the equivalent of experience of people who are sending her CVs of 35-year-olds. Okay, so that trend is also very much starting to emerge. So it's not so much an age thing or generational thing as what it is an experience thing. Yes, the experience has to be there. Okay, good. One more.
Thank you for your talk. I just had a quick question, a follow-up question about your customer onboarding. Have you ever had any customers who were really resistant to not using email?
Yeah, so a very large majority of our clients fall into the financial sector, so the very large EYs, KPMGs, those type of things. And so where we found resistance initially with them was around security, because if you think about the financial data and the conversations that are happening, okay? So what we had to make sure was we basically had to make sure that any tools that we were using, whether they be chat applications or whether they be the collaboration software, met the security requirements. And interestingly enough, that was one of the reasons why I chose Teamwork. Okay, because at the time, it actually ticked a client's security checklist. That was, you know what I mean? So you just need to make sure that from a data protection, you're ticking the boxes that your client has to tick. But apart from that, absolutely no resistance at all. Okay, and we actually anticipated that that was going to be the case. And so because we anticipated and went into the conversation with that, you know what I mean? And so something that we actually pushing very hard, because we have very strong relationships with these productivity companies out there, we're pushing them to get those security measures in place, to get the tick boxes, because if they really want to change the world of work, they're going to have to tick that box. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? But I think we also should end now because of time. Perfect. Thank you so much.